Good day, all. It's Mia for the Mia Narratives podcast. Today, I am going to discuss about the book called "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?" This is the book written by Phillip K. Dick, and it was the book by which the movie Blade Runner was based out of. It is set in the future, supposedly 1999, the 90s, in a dystopian society when the humans began colonizing Mars and so on, places like that. Or I should say planets like that, or heavenly bodies like that. Earth at that particular time was already almost uninhabitable. There was a war, there was a precept for that. There was a war, and they called it World War Terminus. It was said in the book, and it was implied that when the war was finished, suddenly the earth just gathered dust. So they said dust just grew and buried some cities and killed practically some species which became extinct. For example, it made the birds extinct, insects, animals, and so on and so forth. And everybody at this point only had electric pets, electric animals. And if they were able to find live animals, or live insects or live birds even, was already status symbol for them. It was probably like owning a Bentley, I suppose, or a Maybach, or a car that's very exotic like that. It's a futuristic world, but the irony is Philip K. Dick, the author, wrote this to be in the late 90s. I believe it was 1999 or 98 that supposedly these hovercrafts are already present, but of course we know better. It was set in San Francisco, and but it was dismal, and lots of leather jackets, lots of punk rock garb and hairstyle. Very Thierry Mugler, I suppose, the costumes were. And the similarities only, I'll talk about the similarities later, but going back to the book, the characters that they had, compared to the movie, they changed many things. For example, Rick Deckard is still the same. That was the character Harrison Ford played in Blade Runner. He's still the same. He was they called him a Blade Runner, but really that word Blade Runner does not exist in the novel. In fact, they were called bounty hunters, really, but they were legal because they were sanctioned by the police. And their job was specifically just to hunt the androids. Now, I don't think the word replicant was also present in the book. They said androids, or Andes for android, short for android, but in the movie they were called replicants. So that Rick Deckard is there, and the beautiful Sean Young, that was Rachel Rosen in the book. She was depicted in the film as somebody that was mild-mannered, intelligent, and so on, but in the book, even though Deckard was strangely attracted to her, in the book she became an unfeeling, cold android. Okay, there will be spoilers here, obviously, and so if, as usual, because it's a book review, if you are iffy about that, you can, just go ahead and come back when you're done reading, so that we both can sort of, compare notes, so to speak. In the book, Deckard was married. Deckard had a wife named Iran. Their life as a married couple wasn't really that much special, the usual humdrum of the cadence of being married for a long time. What is curious about this part of the book is that at this particular time in man's history, people would be very dependent upon electronics. Something that was like an empathy box, they called it. They would push a certain frequency for it, and the frequency that would emit would give them some sort of emotions. For example, if they wanted to be depressed, there was a frequency for that. They'd press it. I don't know, I guess they just not forget what being depressed is like. You wanted to have good mood, positive and uplifting and optimistic mood. There was a frequency for that. And people pressed that usually for when they were about to go to work. That was a very strange piece of mechanism that was introduced in that film. In that book. The only thing, of course, my only qualms for that is that I don't think there is any sort of machine that can help somebody, a person, be dictated with their emotions or
would suggest something. Although music, let's say, can do that, right? You want to listen to uplifting music for that matter, but once the music turns off, it really doesn't last long, does it? If you still have a besetting dark emotion about you, depressing emotion about you, it really still happens. It doesn't stop. So back to Deckard's job. Now, there were about 8 androids that have escaped from Mars. These androids were there specifically to inhabit Mars, to do menial jobs, if you will. Like, for example, I'm sorry, not Rachel Rosen. Pris Stratton, the android that was Daryl Hannah in the film, for to be a housemaid, like purposes for to be servile and so on. But Roy Batty, the character of Rutger Hauer in the movie, Roy Batty, had a wife also. And he was a pharmacist in Mars. Well, long story short, all of these 8 androids got an inception in their minds that they would want to go back to Earth because they didn't like living in Mars. They felt, quote, quote, lonely. Although I don't know why they would have a loneliness chip, but I think because they were humanoids, they were given this kind of programming for emotion, to have different sorts of emotion. But it appeared that they began to have a will of their own. They weren't just automatons, even though they were androids. The 8 androids were a part of a new iterations of android given by Rosen Industries or Rosen Associates. Oh, that's another thing. In Blade Runner, the company was called Tyrell, Tyrell, but in the book it's Rosen and Associates. I don't know why they had to change it. I guess Tyrell has a more futuristic ring to it. I don't know. So what ended up happening was these 8 people subdued and killed their masters, I suppose, and was able to steal a spaceship, and then that spaceship then traveled here to Earth, and when they landed, chose that they would mingle with the human population because they really looked like they were humans. And true enough, a lot of them were able to assimilate. There was a woman in the book named Luba Loft. She was an android, but I guess in the movie she was played by Joanna Cassidy. But she was an exotic dancer. I remember she was the first one that Deckard retired. And then you've got somebody that was a character that was not in the book at all. The actor was James Bryan. I think he's Australian. This tall guy with a character-looking face. You'd always recognize him wherever he is in a movie, whatever movie he's in. And he was Leon. That Leon wasn't there at all. I wonder if that Leon was Polakov. Another thing I noted was in the book, the fights between Deckard and the androids, it wasn't really a fight. It was no contest. They were not spectacular. They were not very action-oriented, not high-octane the way it was in the movie. I think they had to do that in the movie so that they could hold the interest of the people. But in the book, when Deckard retired the replicants, it was always said, it was consistently said that when faced with possible death or the impending death, the androids would just also sort of die within themselves. They would accept their fate. I wonder if that was programmed into them not to resist in that way. It was pretty easy to kill them as far as Deckard was concerned. They would be shot by the laser beam. They wouldn't really put up a fight. There was no fight. There was no contest in any of those retirements, quote, quote, that Deckard did to the androids. But the interesting thing is that, let me go to that Rachel problem there. So Deckard and Rachel hooked up. She's an android, but then she had some coldness about her still. Deckard beforehand acquired a real goat, a real live goat. And to be able to do that, it's very expensive. He acquired it, and it's one of those things where you have to let everybody know that you have a live animal because it's such a status symbol. It's such most are already near extinct or totally extinct, and so that if they were able to get something real, it was their pride and joy. What happened was that Rachel went to Deckard's house, got the goat, and tossed the goat outside I mean, off the building, and it was a real goat. What a waste! What a total waste. That's there, and that caused Deckard really to plummet, to be so depressed.
And in the book, there was another character, a simulation, a virtual character, by the name of Mercier Wilbur. He was I suppose, what you would call as a representation of the deity for that era, or for this book, or for this civilization. He was a virtual character versus a spiritual character. The people at that time, in this dystopian world, would hook up to this empathy box and would commune, so to speak, with this Mercier Wilbur. He had a counterpart, and that counterpart was a TV host, a funny guy, kind of like a Benny Goodman show type deal, but a little more caustic. His name was Buster Friendly something. He was supposed to be funny. People looked up to him for entertainment and so on, and distraction for this world, for their world. But going back to the Mercier Wilbur character, he would encourage, he would inspire, and give wisdom, so to speak. And he was patterned after the Buddhist god Buddha, wasn't the Judeo-Christian god. But one can really tell that it wasn't real. I suppose when people are left to their own devices, they really will just make up everything, including their god, and according to how they want that god to be in their own mind. So to expound a little bit more on the character of Buster, the Buster-friendly person, he was the counterpart, as I mentioned before, to Mercier Wilbur. In the book, he exposed Wilbur Mercier that he was a fraud. And the other guy that's worth mentioning is J.R. Isidore in the book. In the movie, he is J.R. Sebastian. He was in this Altbau looking high apartment with like an Altbau interior, you know. I love those apartments. The film had been a long time ago, but I remember it because I love those interiors of the Altbau architecture. What happened during this time in Earth, when people emigrated, human beings emigrated to other colonies, there were many abandoned buildings wherein the remnants would just go and inhabit these buildings. And they would live there, they would adapt. The buildings would eventually become derelict and moribund because dust would settle in there higher and higher and higher, and the whole building would just become covered. So these people would just move on to another building to make their abode again. So Pris, the character of Daryl Hannah in the movie, befriended J.R. Sebastian, same as in the book. In the book, J.R. Isidore was what they referred to as chickenhead, somebody that was special. They did say the word special. He did menial jobs. He was not clever enough to work in better corporations. In the book, he was the driver of the ambulance, the electronic pet ambulance, and he was proud of his job. Long story short, he formed a bond with the androids, with Pris Stratton at first, and then Mr. and Mrs. Roy Batty. Together, all of them, the four of them, eventually lived here in this abandoned apartment building, where the climax will happen. I will admit that the main motivation I had for reading the book was because of the movie Blade Runner. And even if I've watched the movie a long time ago, it was only years later that I found out that this book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, that's such a long title, was the inspiration for that book. On the whole, it is an interesting book, I will say that, simply because it is indeed a spawn of an imagination of the sci-fi genre. And when they do this, though, it's always dystopian, isn't it? Even if when they write or make a film about the future, it's always dystopian. Human beings are just very pessimistic. Or is it because if there is negativity and pessimism, there will be drama? That's probably as to why they would always want to depict the future as dystopian and dismal. Is it worth a tumble, worth a read? Naturally, yes. Would it have held my interest even if I didn't watch the movie? Yes. I think so, I believe so. Now, I will say that the element of action was a bit lackluster. In the film, I'm glad that they changed that aspect where There were fight scenes. There was a high octane action. It was a thrilling element. It was exciting and thrilling when, especially with the spar between Deckard and Roy Batty. Would it hold my interest? Would it hold your interest? Yes, absolutely. A very short read, 97 pages. It's nothing to it. You can do it in one day. So this has been another episode of the Mia Narratives Café podcasts. I hope you enjoyed that one, and I hope to be with you again soon. Ta-ta!